Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Elections Arena. I'm Aaron Porras, and today is Elections Day here in Israel, where over 6 million eligible Israeli voters are hopefully running out to the ballots. And I'm joined in the ring by none other than Dr. Mordechai Kedar, the Middle East expert from the Begin Sadat Center and chairman of the Professors for a Strong Israel, and Mark Schulman, columnist for Newsweek and editor of HistoryCentral.com. And before we begin today, gentlemen, first of all, thank you so much for coming in today.
Pleasure.
Did you vote?
Not yet. It's 5 o'clock.
Not yet? All right.
From here, I'm going to vote.
Well, there's still time. Good.
You can still convince me to vote for
I was
someone
the
else.
second in my ballot after somebody who came before me.
It's important. All right. Well, I'm glad to hear it. Make sure you go out and vote, of course, and all of you back home, please vote as well. And now to our first topic tonight, voter apathy, because it's largely estimated that voter turnout is going to be lower today than it was 6 months ago by at least 2 percentage points. So, what do you think the turnout will be? And how do you think that that will affect the end results?
Well, so far it's up a little bit. It's the last figure, it's up 0.7% from last time. So we'll have to see whether that ends up being throughout the day. Could have been people got out early like he did to show they're going to vote. I think it's going to be up in the Arab sector significantly. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu's campaign against the Arabs voting has had the opposite effect, combined with the fact that this time the Joint Arab List is running as a Joint Arab List. The two things are most likely to bring out more voters in the Arab sector, which will affect the overall turnout because that's where the greatest amount of up exists. In other words, we talk about a low voter turnout, but we forget the fact that, first of all, it's very high by international standards. B, our voter rolls include all the people who've ever left the country. So when we have 80% turnout, which we haven't had in many years, but it includes the 10% of the country that isn't here, not to mention the ones that at any given time have flown overseas for various things. So generally speaking, the voter turnout is high.
Well, there's certainly things that we could do to increase voter turnout by, maybe opening up, absentee ballots or making the vote obligatory. But that's for another conversation.
We don't need
Dr. Kedar.
We don't need it because here in Israel, unlike in most countries in the West, here ideology still alive and kicking. People, vote from their belief. Not so because they know good life. It's not a matter of good life or higher wages or things like this. People vote according to their emotions. And this is the biggest, I would say, element which pushes people to vote.
I don't think it's beliefs. I think it's identity politics more than anything else that's come here.
It's
really identity. It's not the belief. If you go to the average Likud voter and you go issue by issue by issue, they'll probably disagree with 90%. Oh, I don't agree with that, or I don't agree with that. But I couldn't vote for anyone else but Likud. That's
why do you think that is?
I think it's because it's an identity. It's become the identity of certain voters.
Well, identity is part of emotions.
It's emotions, but it's not ideology. It's not ideological voting. It's not voting because of a particular ideology. It's because they identify with. I can never forget the fact that 2 elections ago, I had interviewed Ayman Odeh for Newsweek, and on the way back, I had a taxi driver who asked me, who should he vote for? As a journalist, who should he vote for? I said, I can't tell you who to vote for unless you tell me what you care about. Tell me what you care about, and I'll tell you who to vote for. So his main thing was he couldn't afford to buy an apartment. His brothers are able to buy an apartment. He wasn't able to. So at the time I said, well, the only people you should vote for then is Labor because they have a plan to build public housing. And if you want to bring down the price of housing in this country, that's what you have to do, among other things. He said, no, I can't ever vote for Labor. I said, why can't you vote for Labor? What they did to my grandparents. And so that's very much an identity issue. It's an identity that these people did bad to me, these people will do good for me or did good for me, and that's what I have to vote for.
Okay, well, going back to kind of the emotional aspect, what do you think are the biggest issues in the minds of the electorate today?
Well, first of all, we have to understand there is, unlike the American elections, which are pivotal, you don't know in advance who will win, and they can win, even
well, here we don't know for sure either. We have polls and we have educated guesses.
What happens in Israel is that the elections actually reflect the trends in the population. No doubt, since the 70s, it is more than clear that the Israeli society goes to the right. People are more conservative, people are more religious, people less believe in peace, less believe in any rapprochement with the Arab world. People less feel that they can accept the Mapai, the Labour Party, because we don't have any more oranges. as we did in the 60s. Now it's high tech, and high tech, the labor market is based on personal connection between the working and the employer. We don't need the labor unions anymore. And of course, when the left is losing the work market and the peace card which they work with, the left is no left anymore in Israel.
Well, look, the reality is it's not quite the way it is. The reality is, of course, Israel now has the second greatest differential between rich and poor in any place in the world right now.
Those who work are rich.
No, excuse me, no, those in the high tech are rich. I know the figures. Those are in high tech, but only 10 to 15% of this country
distribution of wealth
excuse me, that's only 10 to 15% of this country work in high tech. Everybody else can't make ends meet. That's the reality.
The high tech industry pulls behind
is an engine. Yes, it's an engine, but the fact of the matter is creating tremendous divergence in wealth. But that's not the point. The point is they don't vote on these matters. The fact they vote on their identity. They vote on who talks to them, who they feel is their.
Well, this time we have also the personal issues.
This election is all about Netanyahu. It's whether or not someone who's under indictment or about to be under indictment on 3 terms is so great that he should be brought back to be elected another time. Look, in any other country, he would have resigned. He would have resigned if he would have listened to himself. Don't forget, he's the one who said that Olmert had to resign. He couldn't, before he was even gotten to this stage. Before this stage, he said Olmert needs to resign because you can't deal with your personal issues at the same time being prime minister. But Netanyahu is so great.
Well, there's a big difference between Olmert and Netanyahu because Olmert, he lost his popular basis. Netanyahu, the contrary. Netanyahu, the more he's being stuck in his files,
there is no moral difference. There is no moral difference. I'm sorry. He said morally that he should resign.
But
he said Olmert should resign.
So what do you think, that the people are stupid? The more he's stuck in the files, the more people support him.
First of all, they don't leave him. They don't lose him. He's very much like President Trump, who said that if I shot someone on Fifth Avenue...
Change the people.
I'm not playing to change it, but it's the reality of what we have.
This is the people, whether you like it or not.
No, it's not. It's the Likud who should say...
Change the people.
No, it's the Likud who should say that after 10 years, in any democracy, it is not healthy for the same person to be running the country. I don't care if he's great or bad. The United States learned after FDR that they changed the Constitution.
What? But for this, we have to bring your rookie like Gantz, who never was any minister, nothing. What does he know from how to run a state?
He ran the IDF, that's bigger than any other organization in this country.
The IDF, you run by orders. A state, you run by convincing people.
Dr. So more to the point, actually, I want to press you on that in terms of term limits, because you brought up term limits, and I'm actually very interested in that, because it's recently come to my attention that in a parliamentary system, term limits can't really work. How do you react?
No, it could certainly work. You could certainly say that a prime minister, you can only be
but the parliament in and of itself is a term.
No, but that's fine. But you can say that a prime minister cannot be a prime minister for more than X number of years, and then he has to give up to someone else. No, I'm saying you can do that. There's no reason why you can't do it. The United States learned after 4 terms or 3.5 terms of FDR that you need to change the Constitution, and they did so. And they limited it to 2 terms. It is not healthy in any country, anywhere in the world, for someone to be a leader for so many years, because what happens in any place is you begin to identify yourself with the country.
Well, but what about change for the sake of change? That's not always a positive thing.
It's not change for the sake of change is always a positive thing. You have to be careful about that. But if you knew in advance that every 10 years or every 5 years, whatever it was, you'd have to change who the leaders are, the Likud would have developed a set of leaders. Right now, it doesn't have any other leaders because Netanyahu has made sure that everyone who was a potential leader was thrown out in one way or another.
Well, the whole thing which Gantz runs with is Rak lo Bibi, only not Bibi. That's all. He has no agenda, he has no ideology, no line, no future, no nothing. Everything which he runs on,
he has many different
He takes advantage of the fact that people are sick of the indictments and all these reports in the media. People are bombarded by the left-wing media.
What left-wing media? Excuse me, left-wing media in this country? Yisrael Hayom, the longest.
This is the problem. The Israeli media is worse than the American media, which is against Trump. And Netanyahu is crucified day and night in the marketplace by the media.
That is such nonsense. Yisrael Hayom is the largest newspaper in this country. It gets to more people than any other newspaper. It's illegal, by the way, because it's controlled through Netanyahu and
so
through
close
Edelson.
it.
You can't close it because it's...
Okay, so it's legal.
Okay, so it's... No, everything is...
You don't like it, so it's illegal. You don't like it, so it's illegal.
But you can't say that media is controlled by the left in this country. Look at it's just not true. Most of the stations are now owned by right-wing
television is leftist, except for Channel 20.
That's not true. That's absolutely not true. You don't like what they say when there's truth. It becomes leftist.
No, today it's not Tuesday. It's not true. Right.
All right.
Today
Well,
it's not Tuesday.
Well, let's move on a little bit to kind of another portion of voter apathy, but this time in the ring of the Palestinians, because right now, across the board, the Palestinians, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, are saying that no matter who wins, they lose. Would you agree with this?
No. First of all, if Gantz wins, they won. Why? Because Gantz will give them whatever Netanyahu doesn't give them. He will give them a state.
What evidence do you have for that?
He will give them a state, even if this state will turn into a Hamas state.
Listen,
wait, I didn't interrupt you. Okay?
You did actually, but okay.
Either by elections, as already happened in January 2006, or by coup d'etat, as happened in Gaza in June of 2007. So everybody knows that a Palestinian state will become, in a way or another, a Hamas state, another Hamas state. Netanyahu understands it. Gantz does not. That's the whole difference.
Okay, it's so interesting. I listened to the lies, and I know some of them exact lies. I listened to Netanyahu, for instance, saying that Yair Lapid supported the agreement with Iran. He says that time and time again, and I know for fact it's 100% lie because I interviewed him the day of the agreement, and he told me it was a dark day for the Jewish people, and he was going to do everything he can to fight it. That's a personal thing that I know is 100% a lie because I'm a witness to it. Now, all these things, you're making up these things, the Gantz will do this, and Bogi Ya'alon, this far leftist, is going to do terrible things. I mean, the reality is these are three chiefs of staff of the army who, generally speaking, care about the Israeli security more than anyone else with a great deal of experience, and you're making up things. They're going to do all sorts of things. Where do we have proof of it? None of it. Right. We have no proof of any of it. All we have is the leftists are going to do. Even Meretz at this point talks about peace with security. There's no question that people's position have moved.
Well, we have to move on, unfortunately, now to our second topic, forming the coalition itself. There are a few potential outcomes at the end of the day, depending, of course, on the voter turnout and the division of the Knesset seats. But no matter what, most people believe that we'll have either A, a right-wing government with the ultra-Orthodox parties under the Likud leadership, B, a left-wing government under blue and white, which will very possibly include the Joint Arab List, something that has never happened in Israeli history before, and C, a secular and centrist unity government, which will include the Likud, blue and white, and Lieberman's Israel Beitenu parties. So, what do you think is most likely to occur and why?
Okay, first of all, I have no idea. I have to be quite honest with you, and we will not have an idea for 2 or 3 days until we have the final results.
Right.
Because the decision here is going to come down to which parties.
With this, I agree with you.
It'll come down to the question of which parties passed the threshold and get into the Knesset. So we do not know that, and we're not going to know that. Even tonight at 10 o'clock, when we have these wonderful results from the exit polls, we still won't know because it's going to be, I assume it's going to be right on the edge. Look, 67% of the country said they want a secular government. Now, will they get a secular government? It's only happened a few times in Israel's history. It's unlikely. The only way to get a secular government is if the Likud decides to throw Netanyahu out and form a government without him. I frankly am, I can't say that I can guess what's going to be. I would say the greatest likelihood is Netanyahu will pull out a rabbit and will somehow get to 61 votes. That's the greatest likelihood. But I certainly wouldn't put my money on it because there are too many moving parts at this point, and we won't know for two days, in my opinion.
Well, even if the results will be even between the Likud and blue and white, there is a possibility that Netanyahu will succeed to take some Knesset members from blue and white to the Likud, like Tzvi Hauser, like Yoaz Hendel, maybe with the price of him going out.
Right.
You think Netanyahu is willing to bow out to form a coalition?
I don't think he's willing to bow out because he could have done that last time.
If he sees that he is trapped with the files, he will sacrifice himself in order to save the country.
Only if he makes a deal to get out of jail free as part of it. I mean, I know Tzvi Hauser personally pretty well, and he is not a fan of Netanyahu in any which way, and he would not defect back to the Likud at this point. So the reality is that, yes, he could try to get defections. I don't think he'll get it this time. I think if he doesn't have a coalition, I think the president clearly will put it on Gantz to try. And Gantz has a greater chance of getting defectors, quite honestly, because people are tired. They don't want a third election. And we'll see.
That much is true.
Yes, I think everyone agrees we do not want a third election. We can't be in forever election, and especially since we have very bizarre laws at the point. It's not really clear what powers our interim government has or does not have. And now we have an interim government of an interim government, and it really is not a healthy situation for any country.
Not at all. Just to remind you, Belgium didn't have a government for 2 years.
But they're not in as much danger as we are.
Oh, wow.
Right.
All right, well, so, I mean, like you mentioned earlier, most of the public wants a centrist, secular unity government. So, you know, wouldn't it be in Netanyahu's best interest to try and work with Blue and White and Lieberman?
The question is if you can run a state with two different views.
Well, most people say that they don't really have that many differences in policy.
Most people say. The question is what the driver says. If he doesn't think that he can cooperate with guns, so what are they going to force them to sit together in the same government?
The issue is the indictments.
If it's between that and having a third election,
the issue is indictments. That's what it all amounts to. Everyone has made it very clear that they will not sit with Netanyahu under indictments. So you could say that they could form a coalition government and hold the coalition until such time as he is yes or not indicted. Maybe that would work. However, Netanyahu wants a government where he can get a bill passed that will make him immune from the indictments. And he's not willing to go into any government that doesn't give him immunity. And that's really where we stand at the moment. The issue is, you know, we're talking about he goes to be, the review of his indictments takes place on the last day when President Rivlin has to decide who's going to form the government. The Attorney General will decide by December whether or not to indict him. History says that 95% of the cases, the review does not change the decision of the Attorney General. So let's just assume for the moment, although it could change, that he decides to indict him in December. Then we get into really gray area of Israeli law, first of all, whether he can stay as prime minister or not stay as prime minister. But clearly, the people in blue and white will not stay in a government with the prime minister under indictment. Will they be willing to have some sort of coalition where he has a different position? I don't see it, but who knows?
Well, really, in order to know what will happen after the elections, you have to be a prophet. And with all the appreciation which I have to myself, I am not a prophet yet.
All right, well, so I'm glad actually you brought up Rivlin and the third elections, because nobody wants a third election. It's time, it costs time, it costs money, and the sanity of the Israeli public, of course. So what power do you believe Rivlin will wield to prevent that eventuality?
Okay, I think what he will do, and I don't know how this is legal binding or whatever, is that he will do two things. First of all, he will say that if I give you, whoever you are, if you're Netanyahu, or if I give you Gantz, or whatever, if I give you the right to form the government, that I want to know in writing that upon the time, if you don't form the government, you'll give me back the mandate to pick somebody else.
Well, but he could have taken back the mandate back in April.
I don't know that he could take back the mandate. It's very unclear whether the law would allow him to take back the mandate until they voted to disband.
I believe it is within his right to then give it to a second person to attempt.
That's legally what should have happened. But the Knesset was disbanded before he could actually do that. In other words, what the Likud did was they disbanded the Knesset before Rivlin could take back the mandate. The Knesset is disbanded. They don't exist. We're in a very never land. Now, they violated Israeli election law, but they followed some other law at the particular time by disbanding the Knesset. Now, how he can stop them from doing that, I'm not sure. One of the ways I guess he could do it would be secretly, that basically he could say, okay, I'll give you the mandate. When he comes for an extension, instead of giving an extension, that moment, he then gives it to somebody else and denies the prime minister or Gantz the extension. That's something else he could do. I'm pretty sure that he will not give it. Whoever gets the mandate will not get the extension beyond the period of time that is allowed in the first period.
Well, the mandate, don't forget, is only a technical issue. The real issue is the ability or inability of any man, any candidate, to form a coalition. The fact that the president actually gave him the nomination doesn't automatically give him the ability to do it. It's more a matter of, I think, a ceremonial issue.
No, it's more than ceremony, because the fact
ceremony.
that no, it's not more. It's more than ceremony, because if you're the designee, you come to the various parties and say
Netanyahu had the designation.
But he didn't succeed. He failed.
6 months ago, and he didn't.
He failed. That's absolutely correct.
It doesn't mean that he can or cannot. The fact that he got this designation because apparently 61 at least Knesset members
the various party heads
told
voted for him.
the president that given A, B, C, and D, we might join a coalition. But it's not for granted. It's not for granted. So it's all theoretically and ceremonial.
So what might it be in Rivlin's best interest then to get to a coalition, to maybe give the mandate to form the next coalition to someone other than Bibi and Gantz, to maybe give it to Lieberman, for example?
Well, I can't imagine giving it to Lieberman. I mean, it's possible. He can give it to anybody. The president can give it to anybody who he thinks has the best chance of forming a coalition. He could also give it to someone else in Likud.
Yeah, I was just going to say, could he maybe coerce the different parties? Could he threaten Netanyahu in a sense by saying, I'll give it to Edelstein?
Since it's not substantial, this nomination, it is some kind of ceremonial issue. He can nominate any Knesset member to shape a government. If the president thinks that this man has the ability to shape a government, but it's not for granted.
Look, the reality is that, Netanyahu is very popular with the public. He's not all that popular within the Likud. I mean, despite all the fact that they're saying, yes, I swear allegiance, etc., there are a lot of Likud members that are just waiting for Netanyahu to give up his place, and all of them wanted to succeed him, obviously, as a leader of the Likud. But the reality is that, given a chance to have a palace revolt, if they thought it would succeed, they would do it in a minute. Whether it would succeed or not is a whole other question. But that's in the reality. And Rivlin obviously is no great fan of Netanyahu either at this point.
Yeah, but here we have to add something. I think that little by little, people in the Likud more and more think that Netanyahu is a burden more than an asset. When this feeling will pass the tipping point, they will tell him, Netanyahu, baby, we love you.
Well, isn't the tipping point now ahead of third elections?
Please step aside and allow somebody else to lead the wagon. In my view, the next leader in the Likud will be Israel Katz. This man has the killer instinct, which is totally needed in order to be a prime minister in this country. I don't see a man like Gideon Sa'ar gets into this position, first of all, because of his inability from the personal point of view, and because of his wife. And as you might know, she is from the far left. Sure. Fell in love with her and got married, but she is not.
I don't want to say negative things about her.
Final comment.
I think it's more likely to be someone like you.
I'm not revealing any secret.
No, I know, but no. I'm talking about Katz.
She's
I'm talking about Katz and stories I've known about Katz, etc., and what a great job he's done with our railroads. So we'll leave that part aside. I think Yuli Edelstein is probably a pick who's sort of like acceptable by everybody and is more likely to be picked, in my opinion. We'll have to see. I mean, look. Everything is up in the air. We're sitting here 3 or 4 hours before we get any results whatsoever. The reality is everyone's holding their breath more than anything else. But people do want some sort of change in some sort of ways.
I think the people breathe regularly.
Breathing regularly or holding your breath, I think either way, that is a good place to end it. Thank you both so much for coming in. That is unfortunately all the time we have in the elections arena. Again, I'd like to thank our guests, Dr. Mordechai Kedar and Mark Schulman, for joining us. And thanks to all of you, our viewers, for tuning in. And then finally, for more Israeli news and election coverage on ILTV, remember to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram. I'm Aaron Porras. See you again soon.